Hey guys, I hope you're all safe and healthy. So today we're going to be talking about the global civil rights movement, and we're going to start with women's rights. So the rights movement was divided into four waves. The first wave focused on suffrage and just giving women an identity in the political sphere. And as you can see, not all women got the right to vote during the era, which is about the late 19th century to mid 20th century. It did give women the chance to at least advocate or push for some sort of identity in the public sphere as well as politically. And as you can see, the Vatican City is really the only state where women can't vote. That's because the only election that takes place there is for the Pope, and the only people who vote for the Pope are cardinals, and only men can be cardinals. But other than all the amendments that came out, which granted women the right to vote, the main kind of bill that came out of this first wave is the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which is one of the first documents that actually recognized women as beings who deserved rights, because in the preamble it stated men and women. So as the first phase kind of died down, the second phase started to rise up, and this wave focused on moving women and normalizing the idea of women in the public sphere. And the main way that they got their point across is through literature, whether it's Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique or Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex or Johanna Elizabeth Smith's The Discontent of Women. All these books kind of had the same message, which was to normalize women being in the public sphere and recognize the fact that not all women feel content by just doing housework. And also during this era, a very interesting incident or sad incident that happened was in the Dominican Republic. There was this group of sisters called the Mariposas, and they were very politically active, and they were protesting against their dictator Trujillo, and they were brutally killed for doing this. And there was such outrage because even women were so respected for what they were doing that even today, the day of their murder, November 25th, is seen as a day to recognize the violence against women that there is. And there wasn't much like bill or any kind of law that really came out of the second phase. But as the second phase started dying down, the third phase started, and this focused on issues of violence against women, and also different philosophies of feminism started to come about during this era. This era is really defined by the Riot Girls, GRRL girls, and they kind of started this third wave of feminism when they started speaking out about domestic abuse, rape, other forms of violence against women, as well as patriarchy, anarchism, feminism. So they really brought this to light, and that's really significant because in those other two stages, those issues really weren't discussed. And also during this era, a lot of bills and conventions were held. And an example of this is CEDAW, which is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. This is an international treaty which was adopted in 1979, and it basically is a Bill of Rights specifically for women. And even during this era, the Beijing Conference was held, and in this conference, they actually came up with a 12-step plan for equality for women. And the ideologies I was talking about were the idea of difference versus liberal feminism. And so difference feminism states that men and women have different characteristics, and those characteristics should be celebrated, and no gender has to kind of become the other gender in order to succeed. Whereas liberal feminism states that both genders are completely and totally equal. And both of these are interesting and have pros and cons, so you can decide which one you prefer. The last stage of feminism is basically the continuation of the third phase, but with more focus on economic and political inequality, as well as a huge use of media during this phase. And the use of media is seen through all all the hashtags that have come about, like Me Too, Yo También, in all different languages and from all different cultures. And this created a sense of unity and went against the idea that all the incidents that we were talking about were very isolated. But it showed that this was happening everywhere, and it wasn't just something one individual was facing. And this is really significant because it shows connection and brought some more direction to the feminism movement. And this is kind of all culminated and seen in the women's marches of 2017, where women all across the world, whether it was in Washington, D.C., or Buenos Aires, or India, or Delhi, women marched for various different reasons, whether it was femicides, which is murders specifically targeting women, or rapes or kidnappings. And women just marched. There was about 3.5 to 5.5 million women. They marched for these rights. This So this brings us to today and how women are and what their conditions are in the world today. And I can't go through this whole chart because we just don't have enough time. And so I'm just going to go through the extremes, and you guys can obviously read it. But the highest wage gap that there is today in the world, or on this chart at least, is in Guatemala, which is the fact that women earn 50 cents for every dollar that a man earns. And for representation, the lowest representation rates are in Iran, which is 7%. I was kind of surprised with the US because if you look, it's 24%. That's definitely on the lower end. And I was so surprised. I had to redo the calculations that the website gave because it didn't sit in my head the fact that the US had such low representation. That might have just been me. And for reproductive rights, I focused on abortion. And 26 countries still continue to have abortion as illegal today. One of those includes Madagascar, and other examples are Honduras, Nicaragua, and the Philippines. But in general, the abortion laws tend to say that abortion is illegal from 12 to 20 weeks, roughly, as you can see. And there are obviously some stipulations in those laws, but that's a general consensus. And the most liberal policy is in Canada, which is abortion is legal in all stages, and it's funded by the Canada Healthcare Act. That's very interesting. And South America has something a little interesting going on, which is that it's considered a crime, so it's illegal except in certain cases. Those cases are generally rape and incest. We're going to move on to class and caste rights now, and we're going to start it off with the Indian caste reservation laws. And so if you remember, the caste system in India was really strict, with the Brahmins on top, and the Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and the lower two classes were the Shudras and the Dalits. And it was very extreme in that the Shudras and the Dalits were not allowed to go into temples, were not allowed to go to the same vicinity as the other classes. And at post-independence, because there was such a sense of democracy and this want to create equality, people were trying to get rid of this caste system, and one of the biggest proponents of this was Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who came up with this idea of the caste reservation laws, which basically said that the Indian government had to set quotas to ensure any socially and educationally backward classes of citizens are properly represented in public life by getting education and jobs. So that basically meant that certain seats in colleges or certain seats in any company that wanted government funding, so like police work or any kind of science lab or just government jobs, they had to have a certain number of seats specifically designated for these classes, and these classes are the scheduled class, the scheduled tribe, and other backward classes. So as you can see on this chart, it's pretty much a 50-50 split, in that 50% is for these lower classes, 50% is for everyone else. So this is really beneficial for these classes because it forces the castes to intermingle, and forces them to kind of intermingle and get rid of the stigma that's associated with the lower castes. And it also forces and allows for the lower classes to kind of move up in the world and get an education. Obviously, kind of like affirmative action here, there's a lot of tension. Obviously, ours has to do with race, and this has to do with caste. But there's a lot of tension between the higher classes like the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas, which isn't what they call themselves now, but and the lower classes, because 50% of their chance of getting that job or getting that seat has gone. So it's a lot lower as a chance, which is obviously irritating. But at the same time, this is beneficial for those castes, because it allows them to rise up in the world.
So next we're going to talk about important workers' rights movements. First is the Haymarket Affair in the United States in 1886. This started when thousands of workers across the U.S. went on strike for better working conditions. And in Haymarket Square in Chicago, on May 4th, a bomb was thrown into a group of police, and the police retaliated by killing 50 and wounding 200. This sparked the beginning of modern labor demonstrations. Next is the Bloody Sunday Massacre in Russia in 1905. This happened when a group of workers marched to the Winter Palace to petition for better conditions, and imperial forces opened fire on unarmed protesters. This sparked the First Russian Revolution of 1905. And in Russia, unrest in the working class led to the Communist Revolution. The Arab Spring was a series of pro-democratic uprisings in several largely Muslim countries. They began in December 2010 when a Tunisian street vendor set himself on fire when police threatened to shut down his business because he didn't have the correct paperwork, and he became a symbol of oppressed workers. Next is the Yellow Vest movement in France, which started in November 2018. It began when French workers protested a proposed rise in the price of diesel fuel, but it ended up expanding. Protesters claimed the government's tax reforms only benefit the wealthy at the expense of the poor. Some protests have turned violent, with vandalism, tear gas, and the use of military. Next, we're going to talk about various LGBTQ+ movements across the world. First is the United States. In 1924, Henry Gerber founded the Society for Human Rights in Chicago, which is the first documented gay rights organization in the U.S. In 1952, the American Psychiatric Association listed homosexuality as a form of mental illness. And in 1961, Illinois became the first state to get rid of anti-sodomy laws, which are laws that define certain sexual acts as crimes, and this decriminalized homosexuality in Illinois. In 1970, people in New York marched on the one-year anniversary of the Stonewall riots as a commemoration, and this is considered the country's first gay pride parade. In the 1980s, the outbreak of AIDS caused a lot of struggles for gay rights, as we learned in the health presentation. In 1993, President Clinton passed the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, which allowed gay men and women to serve in the military as long as they kept their sexuality a secret. People were discharged for refusing to keep their sexuality a secret. In 2003, the ruling of Lawrence v. Texas decriminalized homosexuality nationwide. In 2015, the Supreme Court ruled that states could ban gay marriage, making gay marriage legal nationwide. And in 2016, the military lifted the ban on transgender people serving in the military. But in 2018, President Trump put the ban in place again. And here's the timeline for Latin America. In 1967, Nuestro Mundo was created in Argentina, which was considered South America's first public gay rights organization. Between 1967 and 1983 was the Dirty War in Argentina, which was a disappearing and killing of about 30,000 people, which targeted gays. In the 1980s, the AIDS increased discrimination against the LGBTQ community. The Catholic Church in Latin America claimed the disease was divine intervention to punish them. Also in the 1980s, there was increased transgender visibility. This is exemplified by the International Lesbian and Gay Association becoming the International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans, and Intersex Association. In 2005, Honduras banned same-sex marriage and gay adoptions, and in 2010, Argentina was the first Latin American country to legalize gay marriage. But of the 2,115 reported murders of trans people across the world between 2008 and 2016, 78% took place in Latin America. So next is India. And even though this isn't during this time period, it's important to note that in colonial India, Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code declared homosexuality unnatural and made it a criminal offense. In 2009, the Delhi High Court got rid of Section 377 and other legal prohibitions, which decriminalized homosexuality. This was overturned in 2013, though, and the court said it was up to Parliament to legislate on this. In 2018, the Supreme Court invalidated part of Section 377, which decriminalized homosexuality again. And during British colonization, the British tried to criminalize and eradicate the hijra, which is the third gender, through laws. These laws were repealed after independence, and today, hijra is celebrated in religious and spiritual ceremonies, but still face abuse and discrimination. The government has introduced laws to protect transgender rights and imprison or give other punishments for those not following these laws. In the Middle East, there are 5 countries where laws state that if a person is found engaging in same-sex sexual behavior, the death penalty will be applied. And in Saudi Arabia, there is no established or known LGBTQ+ organization. There are 3 Arab countries where homosexuality is legal. And specifically for Iran, homosexuality was tolerated under Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. But after the creation of the Islamic Republic of Iran, thousands of LGBTQ were executed in public. The new religious government grouped trans people with gay people who faced the punishment of lashing and death. Eventually, the government approved sex change operations under medical approval, but there is a strict gender binary. Homosexuality is illegal, so many gay people undergo gender reassignment surgery. Israel was the first country in Asia to recognize same-sex unions. Same-sex marriages aren't performed in Israel, but they do recognize marriages performed in other countries. In 1992, discrimination on grounds of sexual orientation was prohibited. And in 2008, same-sex couples were allowed to adopt. In Africa, homosexuality is punishable by death in 4 countries. In Mozambique, they removed the Portuguese colonial-era laws that criminalized homosexuality. And in South Africa, in 1969, the Immortality Amendment Act introduced Section 20A, which is also known as Men at the Party Clause, which criminalized all sexual acts committed between men at a party, which was defined as an occasion where more than 2 people are present. In 1997, the Constitution explicitly prohibited discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. In 2004, the Alteration of Sex Description and Sex Status Act allowed trans and intersex people to change their legally recognized sex. And in 2006, same-sex marriage became legal. In China, homosexuality was accepted before the 19th century as seen as literature and traditions. In 1912, the Republic of China was established and the intolerance of the LGBTQ+ community grew with increased Western influence. In the Mao era, gay people were viewed as disgraceful and were heavily persecuted. In 2001, the Chinese Society of Psychiatry declassified homosexuality as a mental disorder, but the National Health and Family Planning Commission, which is the government branch that controls all regulations of healthcare services in China, didn't. Currently, laws allow legal gender change, but transgender is still classified as a disorder, and there's a lot of censorship in the media surrounding the LGBTQ community. And this is a map that shows the protection or criminalization of the LGBTQ community in laws around the world. This map shows countries where gay marriage is legal, with the most recent being Austria, Taiwan, Ecuador, and Northern Ireland. It's important to note that Mexico allows same-sex marriage in some jurisdictions, such as Mexico City. And this map shows laws regarding change in gender around the world. This is our works cited. Thank you.